The day my grandmother died, my aunt pulled me aside before the funeral flowers had even wilted and said, "You know she left you that old bakery, right? Don't get too excited, we're contesting it." I was 28 years old. I had just lost the only person who ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere, and my aunt was already doing math. My grandmother, everyone called her Nana June, had run a small bakery in Asheville, North Carolina for 31 years. It wasn't a chain. It wasn't Instagram famous. It was a corner shop on Lexington Avenue with a hand-painted sign, mismatched chairs, and the best buttermilk pie in the county. She'd built it from nothing after my grandfather walked out, raising my mother and my aunt on flour and stubbornness. When my mother died of cancer 6 years ago, Nana June became my whole family. Just her and me. My aunt had a different relationship with the bakery. She'd left Asheville at 22, moved to Charlotte, married a man named Ted who sold commercial real estate, and spent the next 2 decades calling the bakery that little hobby shop. She never worked a single shift, never helped with payroll, never once showed up when the refrigeration unit died in August and Nana June had to throw out $400 of butter and cream. But she showed up the day after the funeral, Ted standing slightly behind her like a shadow in a sport coat, and told me the property was worth something now. She wasn't wrong. The short-term rental market had pushed property values all over Asheville. The building alone, 2 stories, with a small apartment upstairs where Nana June had lived, was appraised at just over $600,000. The bakery business itself had loyal customers, a commercial kitchen, equipment, and a lease on a second refrigerated van. It was not a hobby shop, it was an asset. And my aunt wanted half. More than half, actually. She wanted to sell it. She and Ted had already talked to a developer who was interested in converting the building into high-end, short-term rentals. They had a number in mind. They had a timeline. They had, apparently, been having this conversation for months before Nana June even passed. What they didn't know was what I knew. I didn't say anything at the funeral. I sat in the second pew of the Presbyterian Church on Marymount Avenue, held the single white rose they gave each of us, and listened to my aunt cry in a way that seemed rehearsed. Ted kept checking his phone. I stared at the closed casket and thought about the last real conversation I'd had with Nana June 3 weeks before she died, when she was still lucid enough to sit up in the hospital bed they'd moved into her living room. She'd asked me to hand her the old recipe tin from the shelf by the window. It was a green metal thing, the kind you get at Christmas with butter cookies inside. Except this one was ancient and dented and had a small piece of tape on the lid with the word June written in faded ballpoint pen. I assumed it held index cards. She used to keep handwritten recipes in there going back to the 1970s. She took it from me, held it in her lap, and said, "Sweetheart, I need you to know I took care of you. Everything's in order. Promise me you won't let them rush you." I promised. I thought she meant emotionally. I thought she was talking about grief. She wasn't. The week after the funeral, my aunt called 3 times. The first call was about getting the estate sorted. The second was about whether I had access to Nana June's bank accounts. The third was Ted, not even my aunt, asking if I'd spoken to an estate attorney yet and mentioning, very casually, that they had one they trusted if I needed a referral. I did not call back. Instead, I went to the bakery alone, early on a Wednesday morning before the employee I'd asked to keep things running showed up. I sat in Nana June's small office in the back, the one that smelled like cinnamon and old paper, and I opened the green tin. There were recipes inside, dozens of them, but underneath them, folded neatly inside a small envelope she'd labeled with my name, was a letter. And clipped to the letter was a business card for an attorney in downtown Asheville, a woman named Sandra Okafor, estate and probate law. The letter was short. Nana June had never been a woman who used 3 words when one would do. It said, "The bakery is yours. The building is yours. I've had it drawn up properly. Sandra has the will and all the documents. Your aunt will try. She always does. Let her try. Then show her the paperwork. Don't do it before. Let her commit to whatever she's going to commit to. You'll understand why when the time comes. I love you more than buttermilk pie, and that's saying something." I read it 4 times. Then I sat very still for a while. Then I called Sandra Okafor. Sandra had been Nana June's attorney for 11 years. She was calm and direct, and she explained everything in plain language, which I appreciated because my hands were shaking. Nana June had updated her will 14 months ago. The bakery, the business, the building, the equipment, the van, everything was left entirely to me. My aunt received a small personal bequest, the china set from the dining room and a savings bond from 1987. That was it. Your grandmother was very deliberate, Sandra told me. She knew this wouldn't go smoothly. She wanted you to have time to understand what you were inheriting before your aunt could interfere with it. I asked Sandra if the will was solid. She said it had been witnessed, notarized, and filed with the county. She said my aunt could contest it, but she would need grounds, undue influence, lack of capacity, and Nana June had been sharp as a tack until her final weeks. There was documentation. There was a recorded video of Nana June stating her intentions made the same day she signed in Sandra's office entirely unprompted. My grandmother had thought of everything. So I waited. My aunt escalated quickly. 2 weeks after the funeral, she sent me a formal letter through Ted's real estate attorney, not a probate attorney, a real estate attorney, which told me a lot, claiming that as a co-heir of the estate, she was entitled to full financial disclosure and an immediate accounting of all assets. The letter was full of language designed to sound official. It threw around phrases like fiduciary obligation and equitable distribution in ways that didn't quite make legal sense, but might have scared someone who didn't already have Sandra Okafor in her corner. I forwarded it to Sandra. Sandra forwarded it to the relevant county office along with the filed will. My aunt's attorney received a very polite but thorough response explaining that there was a valid probated will naming a sole beneficiary and that my aunt's letter had no legal standing. That's when my aunt stopped being polite. She called me on a Saturday afternoon. I was at the bakery, working the counter because we were short-staffed. I stepped into the back office and answered because I knew we'd have to talk eventually. She told me Nana June hadn't been in her right mind. She told me I had manipulated a dying old woman. She told me that what I had done was morally wrong and that the family, she kept saying the family, as if there were more of them, as if anyone else existed, would not stand for it. I let her talk. I didn't argue. I said, I understand you're upset, twice, and I meant it. And then I said, you should speak with a probate attorney about what options are available to you. And I hung up. She hired one. His name was apparently Warren something, and he was based in Charlotte, and according to the letter he sent Sandra, he intended to argue lack of testamentary capacity based on Nana June's medical records from her final months. That argument collapsed before it started. Sandra had the video. She had the signed letter from Nana June's physician confirming she was of sound mind at the time the will was executed. Warren something withdrew from the case 6 weeks later. And then things got quieter. And then things got strange. I found out through a mutual acquaintance, a woman named Dolores who had been buying coffee from the bakery since before I was born, that my aunt and Ted had been talking to the developer again, the same one who wanted to convert the building. And apparently they had told him that the property dispute was nearly resolved and that they expected to have control of the asset within the quarter. I called Sandra immediately. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, has anyone contacted your lender? I didn't have a lender. I owned the building outright. Nana June had paid off the mortgage in 2019. Sandra said she was going to make some calls. What she found took about a week to untangle. My aunt and Ted had approached a hard money lender, the kind of private lending operation that charges high interest rates and moves fast, no bank oversight, and represented themselves as co-owners of the property. They had provided documentation that Sandra described to me as creative, which I understood to mean forged or altered. They had secured a loan commitment of $280,000 against a property they did not own, with a repayment plan tied to the anticipated sale proceeds. They had signed documents, legal documents, claiming ownership of something that was mine. Sandra said, "This is wire fraud. This is potentially real estate fraud. I think we need to contact someone." I said, "Who?" She said, "The FBI has a financial crimes division. Given the amount involved and the nature of the documentation, this is within their jurisdiction." I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I think people expect me to say I felt vindicated or satisfied or something clean like that. I didn't. I felt sick. My aunt was my mother's sister. She had been at my mother's bedside when she died. She had terrible judgment and she was greedy and she had spent weeks trying to take something that wasn't hers, but she was still family, and finding out she had crossed into actual federal crime territory made my stomach drop. I told Sandra to make the call. The FBI doesn't work like it does on television, where agents show up with a dramatic speech and everyone is handcuffed by the end of the episode. What actually happened was slower and more procedural. An agent, a woman in her 40s with a remarkably calm manner, came to Sandra's office and took about 2 hours of documentation. She asked detailed questions. She was thorough. She took copies of everything. She told us the investigation would take time and asked us not to contact my aunt or Ted about any of it. I went back to the bakery. I worked. I learned the books. I sat with our main baker, a man named Corey, who had worked for Nana June for 12 years and knew everything about how she ran the operation. He taught me which suppliers she'd used and why, which regulars got their coffee comped on their birthday, how she'd handled the slow months of January and February. I started to understand the bakery not as an inheritance, but as a living thing that needed tending. 6 weeks after the FBI meeting, my aunt called me again. Her voice was different this time. Thinner. She said she needed to talk to me. I said I wasn't able to discuss anything related to the estate without my attorney present. She said it wasn't about the estate. I said, "Then I hope you're doing okay," and I meant that too, and I hung up again. 2 weeks after that, Sandra called me at 7 in the morning. My aunt and Ted had been contacted by federal investigators. Ted had apparently hired a criminal defense attorney within 24 hours. My aunt had called her sister, who turned out to actually exist, a woman I'd met once at a Christmas gathering years ago, and according to that phone call, she had no idea Ted had used the property as collateral. She thought he was handling a clerical issue. I don't know if that's true. I don't know how much she knew or when. That's not mine to untangle. What happened over the next several months I can only describe in pieces, because I wasn't present for most of it and Sandra kept me appropriately insulated. There were federal charges filed. Ted's attorney negotiated something. I don't know the specifics, and Sandra said it wasn't relevant to my case. My aunt faced separate civil exposure, and her attorney reached out to Sandra about settling any claims related to the property. The settlement was straightforward. Signed acknowledgement that the property was mine, full and clear, no further contest of the will, reimbursement of my legal fees. I signed it. Sandra filed it. It was done. The day after I signed, I drove to the bakery before anyone else arrived. I unlocked the back door, the one that sticks in summer because the wood swells. I turned on the display case lights, and they hummed to life the way they always had. The same warm yellow glow. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, and I smelled cinnamon and the faint ghost of browned butter, the way I had smelled it since I was small enough that the countertops were above my head. Nana June had stood in this kitchen thousands of times. She had measured flour in the dark and cried in here after my mother died and laughed with Corey over something I'll never know. She had built something real. I was going to keep it real. I opened a new savings account tied to the bakery's operating budget. I enrolled in a small business workshop through the Asheville Chamber of Commerce. I promoted Corey to operations manager and gave him the raise he deserved for years. I had the sign out front repainted, the same design, just brighter, because Nana June had always said she'd get around to it. Some people ask me why I didn't confront my aunt sooner, why I waited, why I let things get so far, and I've thought about that a lot. Here's what I know. If I had shown her the will the day after the funeral, she might have backed down, or she might have found another angle, one I wasn't prepared for. But by waiting, by letting her and Ted believe they still had leverage, I let them make every mistake they were going to make on their own, with no pressure from me. By the time anyone had to step in, they had already handed over every piece of evidence needed. Nana June had told me to let her commit to whatever she was going to commit to. She knew her sister. She knew how this would go. She had built me a life raft and trusted me to wait until I needed it. I think about that letter a lot. That green tin on the shelf, dented and taped and labeled June in handwriting I will never see again. The way she thought about me even at the end, when she must have been so tired. I don't argue, I don't rage. I just keep the lights on and the oven warm, and I make the buttermilk pie exactly the way she taught me, and I think that's the most honest thing I know how to do. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over you after something long and hard finally ends. Not relief exactly. More like the feeling of putting down something heavy you'd been carrying so long you forgot what your hands felt like empty. I think about Nana June a lot when I'm closing up the bakery at night. The way she folded that letter and put it inside the recipe tin, underneath decades of handwritten index cards, labeled with just her name like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. She could have told me directly. She could have called me into the hospital room and handed me the attorney's card and explained everything out loud. But she didn't. She trusted me to find it. She trusted me to be patient. And I think that trust was itself a kind of lesson, maybe the most important one she ever taught me. What my aunt and Ted did came from a place I understand even if I can't excuse it. Greed rarely announces itself as greed. It shows up dressed as fairness, as logic, as what's reasonable. Ted probably told himself he was just protecting his family's interests. My aunt probably told herself she deserved something after years of watching her mother run a business she never benefited from. But the thing about justifying yourself into crossing a line is that the line doesn't move just because you've talked yourself past it. They signed documents claiming ownership of something that wasn't theirs. That's not a gray area. That's not a family dispute. That's a choice, and choices have weight. I don't think I'm a particularly brave person. I was scared through most of this. When Sandra first used the word fraud, I had to sit down. When the FBI got involved, I didn't sleep well for 2 weeks. Courage, I've learned, isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing while the fear is still loud. It's forwarding that letter to your attorney instead of calling your aunt back in a panic. It's keeping the bakery open and learning the books and showing up every morning even when the outcome is uncertain. And the intelligence Nana June showed, the quiet, careful kind, that's what I want to carry forward. She didn't just write a will. She documented her intentions on video. She chose an attorney she trusted for over a decade. She anticipated exactly how my aunt would behave and built a plan around it. She didn't rage. She prepared. There's a version of wisdom that looks like patience from the outside, and I used to think those two things were the same. They're not. Patience is waiting. Wisdom is knowing what you're waiting for. The green tin is on the shelf in my office now. I kept it. I still use it for recipes, Nana June's, and a few of my own that I've been testing since last spring. Every time I open it, I think about what she built. Not just the bakery, not just the legal paperwork, but the kind of person she was trying to help me become. Someone who doesn't cut corners. Someone who tells the truth even when the lie would be easier. Someone who holds on not out of stubbornness, but because the thing is worth holding. The buttermilk pie is on the menu every weekend now. It sells out by noon, same as it always did. I think she'd like that.